It's been more than a year and a half since two North Korean soldiers were captured by Ukrainian forces after being deployed to Russia and expressed their intention to defect to South Korea. Ukraine's foreign minister is set to visit Seoul today and meet with his Korean counterpart for talks on this issue. For more on what to expect, we're joined today by Dr. Andrew Millard, head of Department of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So South Korea said last week that it'll accept North Korean prisoners of war if they wish to defect. But logically and politically, how realistic is this plan?
So this is right now in the short term, logistically, politically, quite a realistic plan. So logistically, as you said, so far we only have two North Korean soldiers who have said that they're willing to defect. So there's not huge numbers. But also we have to remember the North Korean policy is that during their training, they tell their soldiers, you cannot be captured alive. You must commit suicide before capture. So we know that the North Koreans are trying to prevent this as much as possible. And especially North Korea, Kim Jong-un, he's been promoting the North Korean soldiers in North Korea as heroes of the nation as well. So they're very much trying to protect this. So logistically, I don't think there's too many issues. Politically, however, this is where we have a few different questions. So the first question is, why is South Korea choosing to do this? Now, this could be because South Korea, as we know, is not supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine directly. So South Korea is basically trying to ask, how can we support Ukraine as much as possible without having to send weapons to the area? This is one way that they can continue to support with things like other non-lethal materials and so on. But this could also be a strategy from South Korea, maybe to try to weaken the North Korean position in Ukraine. If they can try to create some rumors, spread the news that North Korean soldiers can defect and come to South Korea, this could weaken the position of the North Koreans in Ukraine. However, this could then later become more of a logistical issue if too many North Korean soldiers decide, oh, we're going to just give up, we're going to be captured and then go to South Korea. Now, on the other hand, maybe North Korea could also exploit this, and maybe they could start putting one or two spies and deliberately getting those spies captured and being sent to South Korea, which could create then some political domestic issues in South Korea. So in the short term, I think there should be no major issues, but we'll see how this pans out.
Right. And do you expect South Korea and Ukraine to make any progress on this issue during today's meeting?
So at the moment, South Korea said that it's going to accept any North Korean soldiers who say they are willing to come to South Korea. What we need now is more specific details. So once those soldiers have been captured in Ukraine, how long are they going to stay in Ukraine? If they have been wounded, if they're injured, who is going to provide the medical treatment? Will they be treated in Ukraine, or will they be brought back to South Korea for treatment? So really they need to finalize a lot of these sort of more smaller details. But I think a lot of progress will be made because, as I said, this is really a place where South Korea can really support Ukraine going forward.
Right. And beyond prisoners of war, the foreign ministry said they'll talk about bilateral issues. So what else is on the table for today's meeting?
So we have to say, front and foremost, it's going to focus on security issues. So, of course, they will be finalizing these prisoners of war details, but also, just again, how can South Korea continue to support Ukraine in various different ways? So we know because of South Korean law, they're not sending weapons. However, they are sending helmets, body armor, financial aid, humanitarian aid, medicines, and things like that. So they'll be continuing to discuss how can South Korea continue that support, but also other trade issues. So again, how can South Korea continue to support the Ukraine economy just in general during this war? And then I think another major issue will be, once the war has finished, what will South Korea's role be in sort of post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. I think that's quite an important issue where I think, again, South Korea can really play a big role.
Right, we'll have to see how that meeting plays out. And meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will press ahead with its frontline campaign regardless of the new proposals from Ukraine. So where is this war heading?
Oh, this is a good question. So actually what we're starting to see over the past few months is maybe some sort of a shift in momentum, arguably towards Ukraine. Because we see in Europe, in the European Union, we've seen some progress made. So, for example, in Hungary, Hungary has basically stopped the veto of the funding. So now Ukraine is getting more EU funding, which means they can buy more weapons, but they're also getting licenses so they can produce their own weapons much more quickly. And also, they're also starting to target different facilities and locations, oil refineries and so on, in Russia, in deeper parts of Russia. So actually, we're starting to see a lot more criticism in Russia against Vladimir Putin. Even the elites are starting to question, does he have a strategy? And so really, we're starting to see the tide turn against Russia. We know there's also economic issues. But this could be a little bit dangerous because this may push Vladimir Putin into increasing his offensive attacks against Ukraine. So I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. Potentially could get more critical.
I see. And what Putin also said is that he expects U.S. negotiators to come to Moscow once the Middle East crisis eases. So do you expect the Trump administration to soon sort of shift its primary foreign policy focus back to Ukraine?
Potentially. However, what we would argue is that if we look at the whole picture, even before the Middle East war started, Donald Trump has been reducing his support for Ukraine. And oppositely, as I just mentioned, the Europeans, they have been taking more of the lead role in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, supporting Ukraine. So on that perspective, we would say probably there's not going to be a huge change. But also, we have to remember the war in Iran, the Middle East, this was a war basically started by the US and Israel. This was a war that could have been avoided. So for the Donald Trump administration, they must finish this conflict first. They must focus on getting the final deal with Iran before they return their focus back to Ukraine.
I see. All right, Professor Millard, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.